Well, David, thank you so much for answering my questions. I want to open it up now to the audience and also to our Twitter audience. So let's hear from you. Do you have specific questions or even general questions about future thinking and the vision for San Diego? Yes, sir.
First off, that you were great.
Oh, well, thank you.
You should do this for a living.
Yes, I should. Thank you.
I was in Miramar last year and talked to a man much the same as you in education and age. And he shared the greatest concern he had that he expected to see in his lifetime, which was 100 million Bangladeshis displaced by the rise in sea level, stopped by the Indian Army from going left, and overrunning and destroying his country. I wanted to know, what do you think is your greatest concern of something you expect to see in your lifetime?
Well, it's my job to pose a wide variety of concerns, and that's one of the things I did in Earth. It's one of the things I do in Existence, and in all my writing for that matter. I'm a child of the 60s, 50s even. I dived under desks when the teacher would say, out of nowhere, say, drop. You guys have no idea what it's like for the air in your lungs to burn. You have no idea what it's like to actually think that there's a real plausible possibility that at any point you'll see a flash in a mushroom cloud and say, well, and may you never feel that's plausible. Boomers have a tendency to find reasons to worry and fret, which is why we don't think about the good news and the things that are working in America, and why we're in phase 8 of the recurring American Civil War. Did I just say that? We can deal with these issues in a calm way. Do I think that we're in danger of floods of refugees around the world because of climate change? Of course I do. But I think it'll be taken care of. Between the refugees and those who've been saying, I told you so, I think we'll outnumber those who've prevented solutions to climate change and simply give the refugees their homes. Some of you out there may be changing your minds right now. That's a radical thing to say. But to be honest, the war on science merits some degree of radical response. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's not just science. If you tabulate where these sources are, that if you actually watch them, they aren't just waging war on science, but every profession of skill and knowledge, from school teachers, professors, to law professionals, to skilled labor. We've got to get past this. And this phase of the American Civil War has got to end. So we get back to what is the great American talent at pragmatic negotiation. Pragmatism. How can we dicker and say that there's the positive sum to all of this? You're passionate about this, I'm passionate about this, I'm a little less passionate about this. Maybe I'll sacrifice this if you'll give me some of this. That's what we used to do. Our parents were good at it. And we can do that.
More questions? Yes, sir.
David, excuse me, David, can you also speak into the mic? We're having a hard time hearing
I'm
you.
sorry.
Thank you.
I will do exactly as I'm told.
Excellent.
Hi. My question to you is, we're in a drought and we're worried about our farmers raising food, but we waste more than 40% of the food that we're growing due to spoilage or people not wanting a piece of fruit with a blemish on it. There's got to be a way of harvesting this extra food so we can feed the rest of the people of the world where they're going to a waste.
Well, I totally agree, and what we need to do is do this on several levels. There is the level of what's left of a pyramid in our culture, and that is the level of the hierarchy of politics. We need to adjust laws so that there are natural incentives for the marketplace to siphon off the still edible but less attractive food at every point along the way to our tables. And then, beyond that, what we need is, as a people, to have those argumentative high school students come home and say, Mom and Dad, we are going to have a mulch bucket. Things like that. Just little things that could turn some of these things into topsoil. A regulation is proposed in some parts of the country that would say all new homes must take the water from the showers and the washing machine to a different reservoir and not into the sewage. And that reservoir can then be used in your garden because it's called gray water. It's going to take a mix. It's going to take a mix of us acting together as negotiators through our process of common action called government, plus our actions in the marketplace as competitive individuals and companies, even corporations, plus our individual actions as families and individuals. And we have to have an open mind that it's going to take all of these different levels. Emphasizing one over the others is a fool's gambit. We're going to have to do it all in parallel, and I have confidence that, what is it Winston Churchill said about America, can always be relied upon to do the right thing after it has exhausted every other possibility.
Excellent.
As Peggy mentioned, we're also taking questions on Twitter. So I have a question. We have a question from Harlan Beha, and he says, can we talk about diversity and what societies like San Diego gain from it?
Well, the number one thing we gain from diversity.
Let's have you speak.
The number one thing we gain from diversity is fundamental. And if you put it on this basis, and this is one of the problems in the arguments between liberals and conservatives, is one thing is that liberals don't, liberals and conservatives always go to the moralistic side of things. So when you moralize that we must have diversity, it's more easy to dismiss. That's just your morality. But the pragmatic aspect of diversity is inarguable and unassailable. Stop wasting human talent. Even if women are systematically different than men in some categories of, there will always on the bell curve be some women who are better than you at being a soldier. There will always be some who are the exceptions and the rules. And the fundamental morality of diversity is not all people are equal, but it is stop wasting talent by predetermining any individual's future based on their membership in a group, because it's very likely that they are an exception to that group, even if your generality about that group is true. So the wasting of human talent is something that we're reducing. But anthropologically, what we're doing is very interesting. When fear levels are very high, the circles of your horizon of what interests you are very close. Your child's next meal, you'll kill a hunting band that you grew up with. We've seen this all throughout all the continents. If that's what it takes to feed your child. If the rains come and the buffalo herds spread everywhere, the fear level goes down and your inclusions expand: family, clan, sept, tribe. And the whole Sioux Nation gathers by a river near the huge bison herd and invites the Cheyenne over for a barbecue so they can plan their war against the Crow because they haven't gone out. How many of you have ever really seriously worried about starving for a week? There's probably someone who has because of our inclusiveness. from around the world, but it's rare. And so our horizons of inclusion spread outward, and we're concerned not about next meal, not about the next harvest, but about topsoil blowing away 2 generations from now. Because we're able to look that far out. And aliens are symbolic of threat, bad aliens, or exogamy, kiss, mating horizons and things like that. This is our process. This is what we do, especially as Americans. And so this process continues. And now there are meetings being held all over, but especially in America, meetings of sincere people who want animal rights. Not just animal rights from being abused or even being killed, but actual rights, citizenship rights for animals. Well, this is kind of mind-boggling because the spread, that's the frontier. Rights for artificial intelligences. Well, we're discussing this in science fiction right now, and it's being discussed right now, and this is the process that you're part of. And it's a process that has our loyalty. It's just that sometimes the people at the front edge of this process of pushing out the horizons of inclusion, sometimes they nag. Sometimes they're not polite. Sometimes they disparage our old loyalties. And quite frankly, I believe we can keep our old loyalties while doing this.
That's the answer.
That's my answer.
Yes, sir, we got to you.
Hi. So I know for many of us, maybe not in this room, but at least for me personally, there's a lot of fear when it comes to thinking about the future and what it might hold because there's so many questions. And you talked about, the prefrontal lobe and stuff. And I guess, what kind of advice or even recommendations would you have for people who maybe they find most of their attention at the present, and you've heard so many times, think about the present, it's what's right in front of you that's really important. And what would you say to that? And what kind of advice would you give to people who are maybe stuck in that?
Well, for one thing, if you think historically and about the future, it helps you to put the present in perspective. You'd not be able to compare this diamond-shaped civilization with the 99% of human cultures that were shaped like a pyramid. And therefore, not only were oppressive and cruel and unfair, but stupid, because the decision makers were a tiny, narrow, self-referential caste that refused criticism and refused new ideas and fresh blood from below. You cannot see what our revolution, and it is still a revolution, easily as radical, though moderate, as any other. You wouldn't be able to put that revolution in perspective if you didn't look back and see that 99% of human cultures were like that. And that's not what we want to go back to. And there are people in our society that want us to go back to that, to feudalism. In the same way that the past can inform your perspective, and you can then see, you can couch political and technological questions in, is this healthy to the diamond? Now you have a metaphor that can help you to decide, this might help or this might help, because it lets you envision things better. The same thing is true about looking into the future. Being aware that there are people today who think that our machines will become fully sapient in 15 years. Possibly 10. What are we going to do then? Some of the brightest people on the planet are deeply concerned about that.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Alrighty.
My opinion only, but it seems to me that one of the biggest impediments to futuristic thinking and problem solving is kind of the stagnant political system that we have today, and that creates a lot of impediments to what you've been talking about in the way of problem solving and thinking about the future. Do you have any thoughts about that? And even though this is more scientific than political science, any suggestions as to how we can improve our political system so as to allow the kind of futuristic thinking and problem solving that you have discussed?
Yeah, well, naturally, I think there are many things that we could improve in our political system, but most of them are nibbling around the edges. It may surprise you, because I think I've given you a slight impression that I think one end of our political spectrum is crazier right now than the other. It may surprise you also to know that I think the American Pax Americana, the peace that our parents created at the end of World War II, is probably the finest creation that humanity ever made, second only to the University of California system. Which I considered, and I graduated from I did my PhD at UC. I believe that we are the indispensable nation, and I believe that evidence for this is the fact that the world doesn't love us. You can never love the imperial power of an era, but hates us less than all other Pax empires have ever been hated. And because we're indispensable, the world cannot afford what I think has been foisted on us deliberately, and that is phase 8 of the American Civil War. And unfortunately, I believe that it can only end the way the other phases ended, and that is by one side winning. Completely. By completely, I don't mean crushing forever. That's not how it happened the other phases. But I mean, all right, you asked about science. I'm going to give you a scientific fact that relates to this, and that is that, did you know that 17.3%, the last tally, of the electrical power in the state of Arizona is generated by coils and magnets arrayed around the spinning in Barry Goldwater's grave? Delivered that deadpan, did I? But in an odd way, even though what I said was partisan, it actually was very mild. All across what is called Blue America, gerrymandering has been largely, except in Illinois and Maryland, good God, been eliminated. It's in those states that were pulling back from the drug war, thank God, starting to. So if we can just tweak our way forward, maybe empty the prisons a bit. I think that we can manage without having to wholesale disrupt the political system, because in all honesty, I don't think we want that. If you look at human history, most of the big radical revolutions didn't go well. We need a constant, generation by generation, moderate revolution, like Ben Franklin engineered back in 1775. And it's been going on ever since. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think we have time for one more. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So when I look into the future, I feel pretty concerned about how rapidly destructive technologies has advanced as compared with our ability to restrain ourselves. I mean, if you imagine, so what I'm hoping is you'll be able to shine some of your optimism and make me feel better. Make it go away, Dr. B. So, if you imagine an ISIS-like group 1,000 years ago, how much damage can they do? They've got spears and swords. But when you imagine a terrorist group or an ISIS group today, and they can get their hands potentially on weapons of mass destruction, and they have no compulsion about using it, it just seems like the world gets to be a scarier place because of the advancement of weapon technology.
I'm not an optimist. I resemble that. I resemble that remark. Who knows what I'm referring to? The great sage of our generation, Curly. I'm not an optimist because I know how rotten people are, but I'm forced to be an optimist because out of this awful, brainy ape, we're barely above cavemen. We did this. We did this. And so I'm a contrarian is what I am. So, you know, if around people like Peter Diamandis who think we're all just gonna get spectacularly rich off asteroids, and well, I can be a real dour curmudgeon and all of that. I can paint dark scenarios. But I need to be contrarian with you and point out that in 1946, 47, 48, there were arguments between two brilliant men. One was blatantly obvious, the brilliant saint, scientific saint of his era, Robert Oppenheimer. And the other was a mad Hungarian, Edward Teller. And Teller was saying something that you're never supposed to listen to. This time it's different, he said. This time people would singe their fingers on a weapon and decide not to use it again. And Oppenheimer said, you're crazy. You know, we have to have world government immediately or we're all screwed. If you had listened to them, you would have bet entirely on Oppenheimer. He was a peerless representative of what a human being is supposed to be like, and he was dead wrong. The mad Hungarian was 100% right. This time things were different. And we reached a point, partly because of Hollywood, pulling this madness away from warriors just in time. But we reached a point where we were able to say, we'll not use this today. Who knows what I'm referring to? Captain Kirk. We won't do this today. Now, can that last forever? Of course not. The democratization of the powers of destruction are following a curve. And inevitably, it would make the mutual assured destruction deterrence that we've relied upon untenable. This is why I wrote The Transparent Society. Mutual deterrence of light is what we're seeing right now on our streets with the arrival of the cop cams and people keeping the cop cams in view and people protecting the cop cam users by protecting them from a greater distance. 2013 was the greatest year for civil liberties in America in 30 years, and nobody talked about it in the mass media because it didn't fit the narrative of gloom. But the Obama administration and the courts declared it a universal right of all American citizens to record their interactions with police. There's good news, there's bad news, and the question is, can these curves converge toward making it to the point where these guys, who are better than us in almost every way, take over, and they are more humble than we are, because that ain't my talent. And you raise kids who are capable of making Star Trek. Every human generation, every human civilization except ours believed that there was a golden age in the past when people were better, and that was their mythology. And our ancestors fell from that state of grace, never to be recovered. We're the first that has taken this image of a golden age and put it in a future that human beings might make. Not us, we're not qualified, but we're qualified to make the makers of that golden age. And that is the one really, truly great brag right of the boomers, is that we made these guys. And you can never take that away from us. We made you.